The reddish light of dawn was barely shining through the tattered blinds. Imani Ochieng shut the front door quietly behind her, trying not to make any noise. After her night shift at the convenience store, she wanted nothing more than to collapse on her bed and sleep through lunch. The second-floor apartment she shared with Nzinga Musamba on the outskirts of Lebanon was unusually quiet. Imani kicked off her worn sneakers in the hallway and wrinkled her nose at an unpleasant smell. Something metallic, heavy. In the semi-darkness, she noticed the living room was a mess. Coffee table overturned, books strewn across the floor, lamp broken. "Nzinga?" she called out uncertainly. "Are you home?" The silence in response made her heart clench anxiously. Imani turned on the hallway light and froze. Dark footprints were visible on the light-colored linoleum. A chain of brown stains stretched along the wall, leading to Nzinga's bedroom. The door was ajar. "God, not this," Imani whispered as she slowly approached her friend's room. She pushed the door open and screamed so loudly that she must have been heard by the neighbors on the first floor. Nzinga was lying on the floor beside the bed in a pool of dried blood. Her face was almost unrecognizable from the blows, her dark hair slick with blood, her eyes glassy, staring at the ceiling. A desk lamp lay nearby with traces of blood on the base. Imani didn't remember running out of the apartment, knocking on her neighbor's door, calling 911 with trembling hands. It was as if her consciousness had shut down, shielding her from the shock. Detective Ebony Ramos arrived on the scene 40 minutes after the call. By this time, patrol officers had already cordoned off the area around the house with yellow tape, and forensics had begun their work. She parked her tattered Ford next to the police cars and closed her eyes for a moment, preparing herself for what she was about to see. She'd seen plenty of brutal murders in her 20 years on the Lebanon police force, but it was impossible to get used to the sight of mutilated bodies. "Good morning, Detective," the young patrol officer greeted her, taking notes from the neighbors. "What good morning? What do we got, Peters?" Ramos pulled on latex gloves before entering the house. "Female, 21 years old, name's Nzinga Musamba. Found by a roommate around 5:30 this morning. Judging from the condition of the body, death occurred around midnight." Ramos nodded and went up to the second floor. The apartment was small, typical of students and young workers, cheap furniture, worn wallpaper, minimal amenities. Now its usual unsightliness was compounded by signs of struggle and blood. In the victim's bedroom, a forensic scientist was working, photographing the body and the surroundings. Ramos watched silently, letting him finish. "Multiple blunt force trauma to the head and face," the forensic scientist said as he continued to work, presumably with this lamp. "Defensive wounds on her hands. She tried to resist. Time of death? Preliminary estimate is between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. Autopsy will tell us more." Ramos took a methodical look around the room. The dresser drawers were pulled out, contents strewn across the floor. There was an open laptop on the desk and a broken cell phone lying on the floor. "Looks like a robbery," she observed, but something about the setting didn't feel right. It was too theatrical, like someone was trying to give the impression of a hasty search. The living room was no better. Furniture overturned, broken framed photographs, things shaken out of bags, kitchen cabinets unlocked, dishes on the floor. "Front door?" Ramos asked the officer, writing down the details. "No sign of forced entry. Either the victim let the killer in or he had a key." She nodded, making a mental note. Her gaze fell on a photograph on the wall, the only one left hanging. It showed Nzinga in an embrace with an older woman. They were smiling, standing against the backdrop of the lake. "Who was the woman?" "The victim's cousin," Peters replied, checking his notebook. "Kiana Musamba. Neighbor says they were close." As if on cue, there was a noise outside. Someone was trying to break through the cordon, yelling and demanding to be let in. Ramos went to the window and saw a tall woman gesticulating desperately in conversation with a patrolman. "I think we're about to meet the victim's relative," she said as she headed for the exit. Kiana Musamba looked shocked. Her dark eyes were wide open and her hands trembled as she tried to show the officer the documents. When she saw Ramos, she rushed toward her. "Is it true? Nzinga? Kiana's voice trailed off. "Are you a relative?" Ramos asked calmly, watching the woman's reaction carefully. "Yes, I am her cousin. I got a call from the neighbors. Said something was wrong." Ramos nodded to the patrolman to let Kiana through, but didn't let her go up to the apartment. "I'm sorry, Ms. Musamba, but Nzinga is dead. She was discovered this morning. It looks like a violent robbery." Kiana covered her face with her hands and started sobbing. Her shoulders shook and muffled moans came out of her chest. Ramos gave her a moment before continuing. "When was the last time you saw or spoke to your cousin?" Kiana wiped her tears away with the back of her palm, leaving smeared traces of mascara on her cheeks. "The day before yesterday. We met for coffee. She seemed normal, maybe a little stressed, but..." She sobbed again. "God, I can't believe she's gone. Do you know if Nzinga had any enemies? Maybe she clashed with someone lately?" Kiana shook her head, but then stopped. "There was one person, an ex-boyfriend. He threatened her when she broke off the relationship. Even stalked her after work a couple times." "Name?" Langston Jabari," Kiana said the name with undisguised disgust. "He's my ex-husband. We divorced 3 years ago. Nzinga dated him for about a month before she found out who he really was." Ramos raised an eyebrow. The situation was getting interesting. "Was your cousin dating your ex-husband?" "They met at a bar where she worked part-time. She didn't know he was my ex until I happened to see them together." Kiana looked away. "It was awkward. She broke up with him immediately when she found out." "And how had he reacted?" The usual. Threats and accusations. He's not very good at taking no for an answer. When we got divorced, he made such a scene." Kiana shuddered at the memory. "I even had a restraining order against approaching him." Ramos made a note in her notebook. Langston Jabari definitely deserved a background check. "Minus Ms. Musamba, I need you to come down to the station for an official statement. And possibly to identify the body," she added more gently. Kiana nodded, wiping away new tears. "Of course. Whatever it takes. I want you to find whoever did this." Imani Ochieng sat on the steps of a nearby house, wrapped in the blanket her neighbor had given her. She was still shivering, though the morning was warm. When she saw Ramos approaching, she straightened up. "Are you the detective?" "Yes, Ebony Ramos." She showed her badge. "Did you find the body?" Imani nodded, her eyes filling with tears again. I came back from the night shift. Nzinga was supposed to be at home. She had no plans to go out." Her voice shook. "The place was such a mess, and the smell. I'll never forget it." "When was the last time you saw Nzinga alive?" "Yesterday, before my shift. Around 4 p.m., she was going to stay home and study for an exam." "Was she expecting anyone?" Imani hesitated. "She didn't say, but she'd been acting strange the last couple weeks. Always on her phone, smiling at messages. I thought she had a new boyfriend, but she denied it." "Weird, in what way?" "Secretive. We used to share everything, and then she started leaving to talk on the phone. Locked her room. One time I came home early and heard her talking to someone, but when I walked in, she quickly hung up and pretended she was just listening to music." "Was she in trouble with anyone? Threats?" "There was this guy, Langston. He couldn't handle her leaving him. Came here a couple times, yelling at the windows. Nzinga even called the cops once." "Anything else out of the ordinary lately?" Imani shook her head, but then hesitantly added, "The only thing I found strange was that Nzinga started seeing her cousin, Kiana, more often. They weren't that close before. Suddenly they were spending a lot of time together." Ramos made another note. "It might not mean anything, but any detail could be important." "Do you know if Nzinga had anything of value in the apartment? Money? Jewelry?" "Not really. We're both students, living from paycheck to paycheck. She had a laptop, a cell phone, maybe a little cash, but no more than $200. Thank you, Ms. Ochieng. If you think of anything else, give me a call. Ramos handed her a business card and headed back toward the house. While the forensics team continued working on the apartment, Ramos canvassed the neighbors. No one had heard screaming or the sound of a struggle, which was odd considering the thin walls in the old house. One elderly man on the first floor mentioned seeing a dark sedan parked outside the building around midnight, but couldn't remember the make or license plate number. When Ramos returned to the apartment, forensics was already bagging samples. Did you find anything interesting? She asked the chief tech. A few prints that didn't belong to the victim or her roommate. Blood samples have been collected too. Most of it's probably the victim's, but there are stains that could belong to the attacker. Looks like she struggled. Cell phone? Broken, but the data's recoverable. Let's get it to the lab. Ramos nodded and walked over to Nzinga's shattered phone. The screen was cracked, but the device still worked. She put on a new pair of gloves and cautiously checked the recent calls and messages. A few missed calls from a caller labeled simply with the letter K. The last message from the same contact came in at 23 hours and 15 minutes. I need to see you. Now it's important. In her deleted messages folder, which had not yet been permanently erased from the device, she found several correspondences with the same contact. They were oddly scrappy, as if the most important parts had been deleted on purpose. I can't do this anymore. We need to talk. Please don't do this. You'll ruin everything. It's wrong, you realize that. People won't understand. I don't care what they think. Ramos took a picture of her phone screen for the report. Apparently, Nzinga had a complicated relationship with someone whose name she was hiding. A secret affair, perhaps? And was the letter K short for Kiana? An interesting coincidence, if so. Back at the station, Ramos's first order of business was to request information on Langston Jabari. The file confirmed Kiana's words. 2 priors for violating a restraining order, 1 for DUI, several complaints of aggressive behavior from his ex-wife. Typical portrait of a domestic tyrant. Find him and bring him in for questioning, she ordered, turning to the young detective. An hour later, Langston Jabari was sitting in the interrogation room. A large man with a sullen look, he was clearly nervous, drumming his fingers on the table. I don't understand why they brought me in here, he began as soon as Ramos entered the room. I have an alibi for last night. I was at work until 2 in the morning, ask my boss. We'll check, Mr. Jabari, Ramos replied calmly, sitting down across from him. But first, tell us about your relationship with Nzinga Musamba. Langston's face changed at the mention of that name. What about her? Has she been talking nonsense about me again? Nzinga Musamba was murdered last night in her apartment. Jabari froze, his eyes widened. What? Murdered? Yeah, I had nothing to do with it. You threatened her after she broke off your relationship. Look, I was angry, yes, but that was months ago. I'd long since forgotten about her. The neighbors saw you yelling outside her windows last week. Langston ran his hand over his face. I was drunk. I did something stupid. But I didn't kill her, I swear. Where were you last night between 10 and 1 o'clock? I told you I was at work. Shift at Bobby's auto shop. 7 p.m. to 2 a.m. There's plenty of witnesses. And you never left your desk during that time? Ilayan. We had a rush order, no breaks. Ramos made a note. It's easy to check. Did you know Nzinga was your ex-wife's cousin when you started dating her? Langston snorted. Of course I didn't. Do you think I went after Kiana's relative on purpose? I met Nzinga in a bar. She gave me her number herself. I had no idea who she was until Kiana made a scene when she saw us together. And how did Nzinga react when she found out the truth? Dumped me the very next day, he grimaced. Said she wanted nothing to do with the man who hurt her cousin, as if Kiana herself was the innocent sheep in our marriage. What do you mean? Kiana didn't tell you about her affairs? About cheating on me? He grinned bitterly. Ask her who she spent all those late shifts and get-togethers with. She always had unusual tastes. Unusual? Look, Langston leaned forward. I didn't kill Nzinga. But if you want to find the killer, look at Kiana. She's not who she says she is, and her relationship with her cousin was, strange, to say the least. Strange in what way? The last time I saw them together, they didn't seem like normal relatives. Kiana looked at her in a way she'd never looked at me. And Nzinga, it was like she was afraid of her and couldn't take her eyes off her at the same time. Ramos watched Langston carefully. He could just be trying to shift suspicion to his ex-wife, or he could be telling the truth. We'll check your alibi, Mr. Jabari. In the meantime, don't leave town. When Langston left, Ramos leaned back in her chair. Someone killed Nzinga Musamba, someone she probably knew and led into the apartment, someone with whom she had a complicated, possibly forbidden relationship, and that someone had left a trail that would inevitably lead back to him. On the third day of the investigation, Detective Ebony Ramos sat at her desk, littered with files and documents. In front of her lay crime scene photos, forensic reports, and Nzinga Musamba's personnel file, which she had pieced together from various sources. 21 years old, a sociology student at a local college, she worked part-time as a waitress at the Blue Moon Bar on weekends. Her parents died in a car accident when she was 15. After that, she was taken in by her aunt, Kiana's mother. Good grades, no trouble with the law, a few failed romances. Ramos sighed and rubbed her eyes. Something wasn't adding up in this story. Langston Jabari's alibi checked out. He had indeed been at work all night. The surveillance cameras at the machine shop and the co-worker's testimony left no doubt. So he had to be ruled out as a suspect. But Langston's words about the strange relationship between her cousins kept her on her toes. The phone on the desk rang, interrupting her musings. "Detective Ramos," she answered. "It's the lab. We have the results on Musamba's phone. Minus E? We recovered the deleted messages. Most of them are correspondence with contact K based on the content. The victim was romantically involved with this man. Pretty intense. Any way to determine who the number belongs to? It's a prepaid cell phone not registered to anyone. But we checked the calls. They were all made from different places in Lebanon, mostly from the Montgomery factory area where Kiana Musamba works." Ramos tapped her pen thoughtfully on the table. "Thank you. Send me the full report." She hung up the phone and looked at Kiana's picture again. 35 years old, factory operator, divorced, living alone. After the first interview, she showed no more signs of grief, testifying dryly and matter-of-factly, insisting on solving the crime as soon as possible. Ramos checked her work schedule for the day of the murder. Kiana finished her shift at 10 p.m. and, according to her, went straight home, where she spent the rest of the night alone. There were no witnesses to corroborate this. The detective decided to speak to Nzinga's neighbor again. Imani Ochieng might have known more than she had said the first time. Imani looked better than the day the body was discovered, but her eyes were still red from crying. She met Ramos at a small cafe near the college, nervously rubbing her napkin. "Thank you for agreeing to talk again," Ramos began, ordering coffee for both of them. "How are you holding up?" "Can't sleep in that apartment," Imani replied quietly. "Moved in with a friend for a while." "I understand. I need to ask some questions about Nzinga, about her behavior in the last weeks before she died." Imani nodded, looking into her cup. "You mentioned that she became secretive. Was there anything else out of the ordinary?" "Yes." Imani looked up. It was like she was living a double life. In public, she was the usual Nzinga, cheerful, open. But alone with the phone, she was a different person. One day I entered the room without knocking, and she literally jumped up, hastily hiding the phone under her pillow. I'd never seen her so scared. Did she say who she was talking to? Nonbada. But I heard bits and pieces of conversation. She called this person my K, and she'd say, the kind of things you say to lovers, not relatives. Ramos brought the cup to her lips, hiding her interest. "And when did it start?" "About 2 months ago, after she broke up with Langston. At first I thought she had a new boyfriend, but Imani hesitated. But I happened to see a message on her phone from Kay. It had something like, "Miss your lips," and a female emoji. I thought, maybe Nzinga is seeing a girl. Did you ask her about it? Yes. She got angry, said I was minding my own business. We even had a fight. And a couple of days later she invited me to the movies as if nothing had happened, and we pretended that nothing had happened. Ramos nodded thoughtfully. The picture was beginning to clear. What about Kiana? Did they see each other much? Not before. But in the last 2 months, almost every week, Kiana would pick her up in her car and Nzinga would return late, sometimes in the morning. She said they went to the movies or just talked. But each time she looked strange, either too happy or depressed. Is there anything else that might help? Maybe Nzinga kept a diary, writing down her thoughts? Imani suddenly perked up. As a matter of fact, yes. She had a diary, a blue notebook she always hid under her mattress. I don't know if the police found it. I don't think so, Ramos frowned. It wasn't on the list of seized items. That's odd. Imani shook her head. She wrote in it every night before she went to bed, said it helped her sort out her thoughts. Do you know what she wrote in it? No, she never showed it to anyone. But one day, when she wasn't home, Imani lowered her eyes in embarrassment. I looked, just out of curiosity. There were a lot of poems, and some initials circled with hearts. N+K, and something about forbidden love. Ramos felt her pulse racing. This could be a key piece of evidence. Thank you, Imani. You've been very helpful. She stood up, leaving the money for the coffee. I will contact you if I need more information. At Nzinga's apartment, the forensics team had already finished their work, but police tape still blocked the entrance. Ramos entered, gloves on. She headed straight for the victim's bedroom and approached the bed. The mattress had been pushed to the side during the examination, but no one had mentioned the journal. The detective carefully felt the mattress, looked under it, checked every crevice between the bed and the wall. Nothing. Where did you hide it? She muttered, looking around the room. Her gaze fell on a small dresser. Ramos methodically checked each drawer, groping the bottom and walls. In the last drawer, under a stack of t-shirts, she fumbled for something solid. A blue leather-covered notebook hidden in a secret compartment. Bingo, Ramos whispered, carefully taking the find out. She opened the diary and began flipping through the pages. Most of the entries were in poetic, metaphorical form, but some were quite explicit. Today, Kay said again that we need to stop, that this was wrong. But then she kissed me like there would never be a tomorrow. How can something so beautiful be wrong? Kay is afraid that people will find out, that the family will turn their backs on us. But isn't love worth the risk? I'd lose everything to be with her. We're fighting again. Kay says I'm too young to understand the consequences, that I'll ruin my life. But the only thing ruining my life is not being able to be with her openly. Ramos turned a few more pages and came across an entry dated the day of the murder. Can't live a lie anymore. Today everything will be decided. Either we will be together openly, or I will tell everyone the truth. Kay is coming over tonight. I hope she realizes we have no other choice. The detective carefully closed the journal and tucked it away in an evidence bag. It was a motive. Nzinga had threatened to expose their relationship, and Kiana probably couldn't let that happen. Back at the station, Ramos's first order of business was to request surveillance footage from the cameras around Nzinga's house. An hour later, a report landed on her desk. A dark sedan matching the description of Kiana Musamba's car had been captured by a camera at an intersection 2 blocks from the victim's house at 23 hours and 35 minutes on the night of the murder. The license plate number was partially visible, and the first digits matched Kiana's. Ramos ordered Langston Jabari brought in for a second interview. This time he looked less tense, even smug. I told you I didn't kill her, he began without preamble. My alibi checks out? Yes, Mr. Jabari, but I have a few more questions for you. Go ahead. You mentioned that the relationship between Kiana and Nzinga was strange. Can you elaborate? Langston leaned back in his chair as if savoring the moment. I knew you'd come back to this. He smirked. Kiana had always been special. She had affairs with more than just men in our marriage, if you know what I mean. And you think she had a romantic relationship with her cousin? I don't just think, I know. His face became serious. I saw them together about a month ago. They didn't notice me. I was across the street. They were kissing in Kiana's car, not in a familial way, if you know what I mean. And what did you do with that information? Langston hesitated, clearly unwilling to answer. Minus Mr. Jabari? Okay, he sighed. I decided to use it. Called Kiana the next day, told her I'd seen everything and could tell their family. She was in a panic. You blackmailed her? Call it what you want. I just asked for some money to keep my mouth shut. She paid. Twice. Ramos made a note of it. That gave Kiana another motive. If Nzinga threatened to reveal their relationship, it would mean not only social disapproval, but an end to blackmail. When was the last time you had contact with Kiana about this? The day before Nzinga's murder. Langston wrinkled his nose. I asked for more money. She was furious, screaming that she wouldn't pay anymore, said she didn't care who or what found out. Do you have any evidence of this blackmail? Text messages? Phone records? Sure. He pulled out his cell phone. I'm not an idiot. I recorded all our conversations. Ramos took the phone and went through the messages. Indeed, there was correspondence with Kiana, where she'd agreed to meet and hand over money in exchange for silence. The last message from her was a curt rejection. You won't get another dime. Do whatever you want. I don't care anymore. Can I make a copy of these messages for the investigation? Sure, Langston shrugged. I'm in the clear. Let Kiana answer for her sins. After talking to Langston, Ramos went back to the case file. She now had a theory. Kiana and Nzinga were in a secret romantic relationship. Langston was blackmailing Kiana. Nzinga threatened to reveal their affair. Kiana, under pressure from both sides, could have snapped and killed her cousin in a fit of rage. But hard evidence was needed. Ramos went back to the forensics reports. Among the prints found in the apartment was one belonging to Kiana, on the doorknob of Nzinga's bedroom. That wasn't surprising, given that she had been there before. But there was another print, on the base of the lamp that Nzinga had supposedly been killed with. This print was partial, but experts said it could have belonged to Kiana. In addition, among the fiber samples collected from the victim's clothing, fibers were found that matched the jacket Kiana was wearing on the day the body was discovered. This could be explained by the fact that she had hugged the body during the identification, but Ramos did not remember such a moment. There was a need to clarify that fact. Ramos decided to call Kiana in for a second interview, but first she wanted to gather more evidence. She requested Kiana's cell phone records for the last 2 months and her bank transactions. If Langston was telling the truth about the blackmail, there had to be traces. By evening, Ramos had an impressive stack of documents on his desk. Bank statements confirmed Kiana had twice withdrawn large sums of cash shortly before her alleged meetings with Langston. Call details showed multiple calls between her and the same prepaid phone from which contact K had communicated with Nzinga. But the most important find was the report from the medical examiner. Skin particles were found under Nzinga's fingernails, and the DNA matched Kiana Musamba. Kiana's explanation was that they had been hugging the last time they met, when Nzinga had accidentally scratched her. But the examiner noted that the particles were fresh, and their location was consistent with the defensive actions of an attack. Ramos leaned back in her chair, looking at the board of photos and notes. All the evidence pointed to Kiana. Her car near the crime scene the night of the murder, her DNA under the victim's fingernails, partial print on the murder weapon, fibers from her clothes. Motive: fear of exposing a forbidden relationship and stopping blackmail. Possibility: she knew where Nzinga lived, had access to the apartment. There was one last thing to dot the I's. Tomorrow she'll call Kiana in for a crucial interrogation. And if her theory was correct, the pressure of the evidence would force the suspect to break down and confess. Ramos gathered the papers into a folder and put it in the safe. Nzinga Musamba's murder was almost solved. All that remained was to get Kiana to admit the truth. The morning of the fourth day of the investigation was overcast. Heavy clouds hung over Lebanon, promising heavy rain. Detective Ebony Ramos sat in the interrogation room, poring over documents arranged in strict order. She wanted to have all the evidence at her fingertips when Kiana Musamba began to deny the obvious. Footsteps were heard outside the door. Ramos straightened up and put on her usual mask of professional calm. The door opened and an officer ushered Kiana in. She looked haggard, dark circles under her eyes, sunken gaze, nervously clasped hands. Didn't look like someone with a clear conscience. "Good morning, Ms. Musamba," Ramos began, pointing to the chair across from her. "Thank you for coming. Did I have a choice?" Kiana asked tiredly, lowering herself into the chair. "Your officer said it was urgent. Yes, we have new information. Before we begin, I'd like to remind you that you don't have to answer questions without an attorney." Kiana tensed, but shook her head. "I have nothing to hide. I want you to find whoever killed Nzinga." "Well," Ramos opened the first folder, "let's go over your actions the night of the murder again. You say you finished your shift at 10 p.m. and drove straight home. Yes, I already told you that. And you never went anywhere else? Ile. Yen Ramos put a surveillance photo on the table. Then explain how your car ended up 2 blocks from Nzinga's house at 23 hours and 35 minutes. Kiana flinched as she looked at the picture. Her eyes widened and her hands began to tremble. It's a mistake. It's not my car. The first 4 digits of the license plate match yours. And it's definitely your Model A 2015 Ford Focus, dark blue. Not many cars like that in the city. Kiana looked away. Coincidence. Let's talk about your relationship with Nzinga. Ramos changed the subject, watching the suspect's reaction. Did you claim you were just close relatives? Yes, Kiana replied firmly. I always took care of her, especially after her parents died. Ramos laid Nzinga's diary on the table. We found this in her room. Do you know what it says? Kiana turned pale as she looked at the blue notebook, but remained silent. It details the romantic relationship between Nzinga and a certain K, including intimate details. It's fiction. She had a vivid imagination. Did she? Ramos opened the diary to the marked page. Today, Kay said again that we need to stop, that it wasn't right. But then, she kissed me like there was no tomorrow. Did that sound like fiction? Kiana pressed her lips together but answered nothing. And here was the entry from the day of the murder. I can't live a lie anymore. Today, everything will be decided. Either we will be together openly, or I will tell everyone the truth. Kay is coming tonight. She's always been dramatic, Kiana squeezed out. Maybe she was having an affair with someone else with the initial K. Like what? Ramos asked, raising an eyebrow. How would I know? She didn't tell me about her personal life. Ramos pulled out the next document, the phone records. Interestingly, there were numerous calls made from your phone to the prepaid number from which contact K was texting Nzinga. A coincidence? Kiana licked her lips nervously. I don't know what you mean. And another coincidence is that you withdrew large sums of cash twice on the days Langston Jabari claims to have blackmailed you over your relationship with Nzinga. Langston? Kiana shuddered. That liar. He's avenging my divorce. But he has proof. Recorded conversations, messages. Ramos leaned forward. You paid him to keep quiet about your relationship with Nzinga. And then you refused to pay him the day before she was killed. That That's not true. Kiana was starting to get visibly nervous. He made it up. He made up fake evidence. What about the DNA under Nzinga's fingernails? It matches yours, I explained. We hugged the last time we met. She accidentally scratched me. The medical examiner says the particles are fresh, and their location is characteristic of defensive actions in an attack. Kiana fell silent, clearly trying to come up with an explanation. At that moment, there was a knock on the door. Ramos got up and walked out, leaving the suspect alone with her thoughts. Waiting for her in the hallway was Imani Ochieng, looking worried. "Detective Ramos, I remembered something important," she blurted out. "I don't know if it's relevant, but..." "What is it?" Ramos asked, pulling the girl aside. "Nzinga's laptop. She'd installed some kind of application on it a few weeks ago. For security," she said. "What kind of app?" "Some kind of security system. It activated the laptop's camera when it detected movement in the room, recorded everything and saved it to the cloud." Ramos felt her pulse quicken. This could be a crucial piece of evidence. "Are you sure?" "Yes." Imani nodded. "She showed it to me once, said she was afraid of someone going through her things when we weren't home. But I think..." The girl lowered her voice. "Maybe she was afraid of someone in particular? Or wanted to write something down? Where is that laptop now?" "I don't know. It was in the room the night of the murder. On the desk." Ramos mentally went through the evidence list. The laptop had indeed been recovered, but it was in damaged condition. Broken screen, traces of liquid on the keyboard. Forensics have been trying to recover the data, but so far, no luck. "Thank you, Imani. This could be important." Ramos contacted tech immediately. "I need to check Nzinga Musamba's laptop for a surveillance program right away and see if any recordings have been saved to cloud storage." "We will do that," the technician replied. "Give us a couple hours." Ramos returned to the interrogation room where Kiana sat with her head down on her hands. "Minus Miss Musamba. We'll continue this conversation later. In the meantime, you'll have to wait here." "Can I go home?" Kiana asked hopefully. "Nonbada. Stay at the station." Ramos spent the next 3 hours waiting in suspense. Finally, her cell phone rang. "Detective, you're not going to believe this." The technician's voice sounded excited. "We found a surveillance program on the laptop. And yes, it was saving the footage to the cloud. We restored access through the victim's account. Minus I got footage from the night of the murder. The quality's not perfect. Laptop was on a table. Camera only captured part of the room. But, you can see everything. I'll be right there." In the technical department, Ramos was met by a young specialist with disheveled hair and eyes red from lack of sleep. "Here," he pointed to a monitor. "The recording starts at 23 hours and 41 minutes. The camera activated when someone entered the room." An image of Nzinga's bedroom appeared on the screen. Part of the bed and the door were visible. Suddenly, the door opened and 2 women, Nzinga and Kiana, entered. They were clearly arguing. The sound was not very clear, but the words were parsed out. "I can't go on like this," Nzinga was saying, waving her arms. "Either we stop hiding or it's over." "You don't realize what you're asking," Kiana replied, her voice sounding strained. "It will ruin our lives. My life is being ruined by lies. I love you, and I want to be with you openly." "Nzinga, please." "No, I've made up my mind. Tomorrow I'm telling everyone, family, friends. No more lies." Kiana's face contorted with anger. She grabbed Nzinga by the shoulders and shook her. "You won't do it! Let me go!" "I'm serious, Kiana. I'm tired of hiding. And I'm tired of your ultimatums. You're acting like a child." The argument was getting hotter and hotter. Nzinga pushed Kiana away and tried to leave the room. Kiana grabbed her arm and yanked her back with force. Nzinga fell on the bed. Kiana then noticed the laptop on and froze for a moment as if realizing something. "You're recording me?" Her voice turned icy. "Is this blackmail?" "What? No, I'm..." But Kiana had already grabbed the desk lamp. The last thing the camera caught was her bringing the lamp over Nzinga. Then, there was a scream, the sound of impact, and the screen went out. Apparently, Kiana had found the camera and damaged the laptop. Ramos stared at the darkened screen, feeling a heaviness in her chest. She'd seen many violent crimes in her career, but this moment of transition from altercation to murder had always been particularly frightening. "Make a copy of the tape and have it ready for court," she ordered. "It's crucial evidence." Back in the interview room, Ramos found Kiana in the same position, hunched over, head down. "Minus Ms. Musamba," the detective began, sitting down across from her. "We have the videotape from the night of the murder." Kiana looked up sharply, her eyes widening in horror. "What?" Nzinga's laptop was equipped with a video surveillance program. The camera recorded your arrival, the argument, and the moment you swung the lamp. Kiana froze, her face turning ashy gray. It's impossible. The recording was saved in the cloud. You damaged the laptop, but you couldn't destroy the data." There was a long pause. Kiana stared at one point, as if seeing something inaccessible to others. Finally, she spoke, quietly, almost in a whisper. I didn't plan to. Things just got out of control." "Tell me what happened that night," Ramos said softly, turning on the recorder. Kiana took a deep breath, as if preparing to dive into icy water. "We'd been dating for about 3 months. It all started by accident. I was comforting her after her breakup with Langston. One thing led to another." She shook her head. "I knew it was wrong. She's my cousin, I'm 14 years older, but I couldn't resist." Kiana fell silent, gathering her thoughts. "At first, everything had been perfect. The secret meetings, the calls, the texts. But Nzinga wanted more, wanted us to be open, didn't realize that people wouldn't accept us. Family, colleagues, friends, no one." "And Langston found out about you?" "Yes." Kiana grinned bitterly. "He saw us together and started blackmailing us. I paid him to keep quiet. But the money ran out and his appetite grew." "What happened the night of the murder?" Nzinga called, said we needed to talk, that she could no longer live a lie. "I came, hoping to convince her to wait." Kiana swallowed. "But she was adamant. Said she'd tell everyone about us tomorrow, even if I didn't want her to." Tears rolled down Kiana's cheeks. "I panicked. My whole life was falling apart. My job, my family, I'd lose everything. And that money to Langston." She shook her head. "We had a fight. She tried to leave. I saw the laptop on and I figured she was recording our conversation for blackmail. That was the last straw." "You grabbed the lamp." "I don't remember how many times I hit it," Kiana whispered. "I only remember her eyes, surprised, frightened, and then empty." She covered her face with her hands and burst into tears. "I panicked. I made a mess to make it look like a robbery. I smashed my laptop, my phone, but I couldn't find the journal, even though I looked for it." Ramos gave her a napkin. "What happened next?" "I went home, threw away the bloody clothes, took a shower, and then in the morning, when the neighbors called, I just played the grief-stricken cousin." Kiana looked up at the detective. "I loved her. I really did. I was just, scared." Ramos turned off the recorder. "Kiana Musamba, you are under arrest for the murder of Nzinga Musamba. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney." While the officer handcuffed Kiana, Ramos organized the paperwork into a folder. Another case closed, another killer going to jail. But there was no satisfaction, only heaviness and sadness. The captain met her in the hallway. "Good work, Ramos. Clean confession, hard evidence. The DA will be pleased." "Thank you, sir." Outside, Ramos lifted her face to the sky. The rain had finally fallen, large drops washing the dust off the sidewalks and cars. She thought of Kiana and Nzinga, 2 women bound by blood, love, and now death. About how fear of judgment and rejection had turned feeling into tragedy. People have often killed because of passion, jealousy, anger. But sometimes the deadliest weapon was fear. Fear of being rejected, judged, misunderstood. Fear of losing what you thought was your life. Ramos got into the car and started the engine. There were other cases ahead, other crimes, other human tragedies. But this story, the story of two women whose forbidden love turned to blood, would stay with her for a long time. As a reminder that the worst prisons are the ones we build in our own hearts and minds.